Well, there used to be a saying that in polite society we don't talk about religion or politics. And that seems to have fallen a little bit by the wayside over the years, but there is a legal issue about what kind of office politics speech is appropriate, what can be restrained by the and that sort of thing. And we handle that from time to time at Denton Peterson because we do a lot of employment law. So the issue is, what's legal? You know, obviously what makes common sense, what your mom would be happy with is one thing. We advise clients not on what our moms would be impressed with, but what the law permits. The first question to ask is whether we're talking about a private or a public employer. Here at Denton Peterson, we represent pretty much all private employers and employees. So what I'm talking about is for private employees and private employers, and not so much in the public arena where the laws can be different. Because in the private arena, the First Amendment doesn't apply. People think, oh yeah, First Amendment, I can say what I want, it's free speech, it's America, and that's true. But the First Amendment prevents the government from stopping you from saying things. It doesn't prevent your employer from stopping you from saying things. So under certain situations, your employer can prevent you from engaging in certain types of political speech. Broad restrictions are generally okay. To say that, hey, we're not going to talk about politics at the office, generally speaking, is okay. But there are exceptions. One exception, for example, is under the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act. That's the act that gives employees the right to unionize. It also gives them the right to communicate, to improve their work conditions. And an employer may not prevent them from doing that. There are other exceptions to the broad rule that private employers can control speech in their workplace. But there are subtle differences, and an experienced attorney will be able to advise an employer and an employee about those. With respect to the specific provisions under the NLRA, there are certain things that you definitely can do as an employer. You can communicate general expectations to your employee. You've got to be respectful to each other. There's no harassment. You can't discriminate against one another. You can't retaliate against one another. Those sorts of things. Those sorts of general rules are okay. It's also okay to have a blanket restriction generally saying no political speech during work hours. Work time is for work, right? You're not, as an employer, trying to prevent people from talking politics. You're just saying that if you're supposed to be doing your work, then you shouldn't be sitting around talking about politics. And generally speaking, a policy like that is okay. It's also generally okay to have a policy that says it's not permitted to use employers' equipment for political speech. So you can't use office computers to log on to the campaign website and do whatever it is you want to do. Or you can't use company phones to make, calls that are political in nature, those sorts of things. Always best to make those kind of recommendations as broad as possible so that you're not focusing specifically on political speech if you can avoid it. For example, it's better to have a policy that says no using phones for personal use than it is to say no personal phones for politics. Now there's a few things that you can't do under the National Labor Relations Act. You can't limit speech about workplace conditions. So you couldn't have a policy saying, hey, no sitting around the break room and griping about the management. That would be against the law because that would be employees talking about their workplace conditions and what they could do to improve them. There have in fact been NLRA decisions that have stated that it's against the law for an employer to have a policy saying that employees can't discuss their compensation. A lot of times employers will want to say, well, your compensation is confidential, but if you're preventing your employees from comparing the salaries that they make, then you're preventing them from talking about their workplace conditions and possibly bettering those conditions. So you've got to be very careful as an employer what you do and don't permit. But getting back to the political stuff, you cannot be unwise about any dress codes you may have. Dress codes are appropriate under some circumstances, but if they're too broad, for example, if they cover buttons and they cover specific types of shirts to be worn, if they rise to the level of a total ban on political speech, then you got to be really, really careful. You can't have a total ban on political speech, and as you've probably gathered if you've gotten to the end of this video, some of the things play off of each other a little bit. There are some nuances, there's some subtleties, and it pays to talk to someone who can understand your specific situation, talk about what's going to make sure that you as an employer are following the law and still maintaining the productivity that you need to have in your workplace.